Hey everyone, I'm Charlie Shrem, and you are listening and hopefully watching Untold Stories, where twice a week I get to dive deep with some of crypto's most influential leaders, and honestly, some of the coolest and craziest people I ever met, including my guest today, and really figure out how this movement came to be. And now with the prices of everything just skyrocketing as fast as we can, faster than we can check CoinMarketCap or CoinGecko or whatever you use. Now that that's all happening, we kind of really need to know where are we going from here. So if you listen to the show, if you've been listening to the show, you know, and you have a better idea of what to do. And I wouldn't be here today. The show wouldn't be anywhere without my friends at the Blockworks Group, a media and production company that I trust completely. They have over 20 podcasts in their network, including the podcast of my friends. So check them out at blockworksgroup.io. And with that, Chris Burniske, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Charlie. It's a privilege to be on with a Bitcoin and crypto OG.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you because I want to poke your brain on a lot of the things that have been going on. And it's crazy that you call me an OG because I kind of look at you as an OG. And the other day I learned that OG doesn't just stand for original gangster, which I guess I grew up in Brooklyn. That's what I thought it was, but it stands for old guard. So I kind of look at that. Yeah, right. So I kind of look at certain people. Everyone I've talked to on this show, I would consider an OG, because if you're coming on this show, then myself and the listeners consider you guys you guys and you girls guards of this industry. That's kind of how I look at it. What do you think about that?
Well, I learned something today, and I guess that says something about our generation thinking of it as original gangster and not old guard. So
that term existed before. Yeah, I didn't know.
I think it's interesting because crypto can be very time focused, right? So even though I explored, I got sucked into exploring the Silk Road with friends in college in 2012. And that was neat and that was exhilarating. I didn't really dive into the industry until 2014. And at that time, to me, you were the established one, right? You were the one where there were stories, or you were appearing at things. And so I think it really just depends, because crypto so focuses on when did you enter. It's kind of seared into us. It's a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 6-year-old. The 6-year-old's I'm the oldest, and the 4-year-old is just looking up at the 6-year-old. So I think a lot of that gets ingrained in our brains, and then regardless of how much we grow or how established we become, I would say we always remember, at least I do, who taught us things, who was innovating early. So really looking up to Andreas, or I even remember Adam Ludwin when he was at Chain, and how he thought about blockchains more abstractly early. And now that the space has grown so much more, there's a lot more people, but certain characters from the very early days stick out in my mind as OGs, and you're definitely one.
Thank you. I guess I agree with that. And so a lot of people, though, that you mentioned that were around in the early days are not still with us. They've passed away. Some of them have passed away. I'm thinking of a few people, but a lot of them have kind of like Satoshi have moved on to other things. And I remember reading early on, maybe it was not early on, honestly, maybe it was 2013 or 2014. I remember reading that quote again by Satoshi saying I'm moving on to other things. And back then I was I can't, how crazy is this person or people to not even just watch from a distance, right? But now that I think about it, when Satoshi wrote that, he was already 3-4 years deep into this, because he was talking about Bitcoin as early as 2008. He was releasing bits of code. He was sharing. There were early miners as early back as early 2008, I think it was. I forget the exact date. And I think when Satoshi wrote that, it was maybe 2010 or 2011. So now, having been in the space almost 10 years, in a few months, almost 10 years myself, I kind of understand why Satoshi said that, because crypto is exhausting.
It is exhausting. There's no doubt. And I did a lot of work when we were writing Crypto Assets, trying to figure out who Satoshi was, he, she, they group. And I think that there's a lot, given what I'll just call Satoshi they created, there's so much pressure if you're that individual or group of people, that I like to think that they're still watching, they're still attuned to everything, but that they just knew, for the sake of their own safety, they needed to step back, from any public traceability or anything like that. But there's no doubt that it's exhausting. I mean, I've watched my relationship with Twitter kind of wax and wane over time. I really loved Twitter in so first I was tweeting for ARC for one of their handles, and then I got to make my own handle, I think in 2016 it was. But early on, it was such a fun place. And then, this is 2014, 15, 16, and then 17, it was exhilarating, and that was probably peak Twitter. And then since then, and with the following that's grown, Twitter's become a lot more exhausting, right? There's, because early on it used to be a lot of interesting conversations, and I was more comfortable, I would say, being vulnerable on Twitter. Whereas at a certain, once you get to a certain scale, people want to attack you, right? And so then being vulnerable is a lot harder if you know that you're going to get attacked regardless of what you say. And that's just one example. There's a lot of examples.
There's the main example, though. It's the reason that some of the people who were involved in at higher places very early on haven't rejoined the industry. Well, they're kind of like enjoying their semi-retirement now. But right. I struggle with staying in the industry too, just because of the anxiety. But I just do a podcast now. You talk about me being on the news and everything. Back then, that was my downfall. Being that poster child, being on top, the early evangelizing, it was a double-edged sword. It was great for the early days of the industry, and it helped what it helped. But at the same time, it hurt me really bad. And rejoining this industry was something that I was unsure what to do. But then I realized that I can't really, do anything else.
What was that process like for you when you were rejoining and inserting yourself in the conversation again?
I look at my life, and I will always look at my life under the context of before prison and after prison. That was such a fundamental shift into who I am as Charlie Shrem that for the rest of my life, I can tell you things that it was a before prison or after. And what you're talking about actually was the transition of the during. Before prison, it was all, I would walk around like my shit didn't stink. I was the top of the most important person in the world. And I had $400K in my bank account. And that was like so much money for a 21-year-old. I had no debt. So I was just traveling around the world, and I was speaking to 3 different news media a day. And I was saying like, F you government, we're never gonna work with you. And that was stupid because I was a child, not realizing the bigger picture of this industry and how eventually we're all gonna need to mesh and transition and work together. Me doing that did a service, but it also did a disservice. And a lot of people in the community still till today won't talk to me, haven't forgiven me for those like early messages that I would preach. But that didn't answer your question. What was that?
It did in part.
Yeah, it kind of did. But the transition I think happened when I was in prison, because at that point I was trying to follow the industry, but I don't know if you remember this time. It was like crypto as an industry and as an experiment and as everything, to me at least, looked like it was on life support. When I got arrested, the price was at $1,000. And a year and a half later, when I actually went in, the price was sitting around 220. So it's just a slow drip leak. Imagine, like you remember, so like the trauma that the early some of those people we had back then was just devastating, right? And so when I went in, I remember how many I had less than. It was like maybe like a dozen or so Bitcoin. I remember I've already my financials have all been made like transparent many years ago because I've had to submit reports to the government and stuff like that. But so, I was going in there, I was saying to myself, when you come out, this industry may not exist anymore. This thing may not exist anymore. People may not write you letters. No one's going to know who you are. When you get out, like I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I figured out that I would just plan on it like as I'm getting out. And I didn't really get Bitcoin price updates. People would mail me like letters, and people would mail me their white papers written by hand. And one guy tried to write me like something in code using a deck of cards. And I'm like, I'm too tired for this. And dude, I would get so much mail people would wonder like, who is sending me all this mail? Like on mail day, it was like, of course Shrem's getting something today, Shrem, like, of course Shrem. So whatever, like that.
That's
But,
heartwarming, at least in
yeah,
the
it was
midst of
really
a
nice.
very humbling experience.
I remember writing a letter to a Bitcoin ATM company based in like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, saying, hey, like, I don't know if you know me. I'm Charlie Shrem. I'm getting out of jail in a few months. Can I work for you? I'll just clean your bathrooms. And they were like, we don't have the budget to support you. I said, I don't need much money. My wife ended up getting me a job as a dishwasher. She was my girlfriend at the time. Now we're married, but she got me the dishwasher that was at a restaurant attached to the winery where she worked out. And she worked to send me money when I was in prison because he needed some money. It was crazy, but that's when like the transition to like me personally kind of happened, realizing that this industry is really, and this whole community, and this is really like, this is all I have. And this is what I'm going to be the best at for the rest of my life. And I want to leave off my rambling with a statement.
No, it's super fascinating, but go ahead.
I want to say something about myself and then you tell me what you think. But someone just told me the other day, he said, I'm trying to remember the exact quote. He said, you need to figure out, he's told me this, Charlie. I said, Charlie, you need to figure out who you are outside of crypto in order to really understand like who you are as a person inside of it. Because my whole adult life has been Bitcoin. I found out a bit in the years from high school to college, right? So I don't have a life outside of this. Mm-hmm. So now I'm thinking back and I'm saying, do you think that's necessary? Do I have to go and try to like search and be that wandering kind of like, the wandering Jew again and figure out what I want to do? Do you feel that? Because you're a largely adult working life. You started off as the blockchain projects lead at ARC, and then you went into, now you're the partner at Placeholder VC. And if people go to placeholder.vc, they'll see you're involved in and invested in dozens of projects that everyone knows about. Right.
That's a really deep question. I would say, even if we step outside of crypto, so I remember when I was 20, I did my first 10-day Vipassana sit, which is a 10-day silent meditation where you're only allowed to talk to the assistant teachers if you have questions. And there's like a 1-hour window in the middle of the day where you can wait in line to talk to people. And that was at a difficult time in my life. I had broken my collarbone snowboarding. My room had flooded. I had broken up with my girlfriend of a year and a half. I was like, my mind was a mess. And I had gone to this Vipassana retreat a friend had told me, if you want to just calm your mind, go to this place. And for the first 3 days, you'll just focus on the sensation here. And I was like, that's great. If I could just focus on that sensation and leave all other thoughts behind, that would be amazing. But one of the things that first sit taught me was that vacuum, that void of all external things. Really, it meant that everything that I thought I was kind of disappeared, crumbled. And it led to the question of, well, what does remain? And so asking very similar questions to what you're asking now. And it's been 10 years of rebuilding from that experience. And I've done a number of sits since, none as impactful as that first one.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Where I am, I highly recommend them if you can find the time, and they're free, and it's an amazing organization. But where I find myself now is really the only thing that I can trust is the sense of flow. And if I'm getting energy from an activity that is just flowing because I'm so enthused and focused and exhilarated by what it is. And so I tend to follow those things. So like surfing is a big one, probably the biggest one in my life that gives me that. Glass blowing is another one. And thinking about
that sounds like a great hobby. I need to do that.
Glass blowing from high school. It's a random thing.
Is it? Okay. No, keep going.
And so just to wrap with this idea of crypto, thinking about crypto, writing about crypto, helping our entrepreneurs, all of that gives me flow. And so I trust that, and I follow that, and I do that. But I have worked to develop a grounding outside of crypto, because exactly what we were talking about prior, it's not just the social components of crypto that are stressful. It's also the security components, right? Like constant. I've had too many to really remember at this point. Security scares or potential breaches of being targeted. It's also this constant evolution where you can think you've invested in the bee's knees technology, and 6 months later something is coming out that's going to obviate it. And so there are all these kind of neuroses that I would say require a grounding, at least to live healthily on a day-to-day basis outside of crypto.
So if I understand you correctly, the intuition of like flow, that largely is like an unquantifiable intuition, is something that you use on a daily basis. And I have to tell you, you're one of the only people outside of my family that I've spoken to of this about, and I'm happy the listeners can hear about this and hopefully learn from it. But my mother-in-law, she taught me, and she's a very big believer, I know out of all people, right, of going with the flow. She nails it down. It's on every poster in her room. Her dog's name is Flo, Flow, Flow Girl, just because of this. And I can't tell you how many deals that I am so happy that I just you don't feel right and it doesn't flow. And then you have other deals that sometimes you can't put a picture or a pin on why it's supposed to happen, but it's flowing. And if it flows, it goes. And you have to follow the flow sometimes. And a lot of people say it's like hocus pocus and magic, but really, 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 if you look at flow, all it is our subconscious mind not explaining to us why it's going towards one direction over another. And that's what that is. It's our brains basically knowing what an answer should be or which direction should go, but it's not able to bring it to our conscious mind. And that's the flow. It's from your experiences, it's from your education, and it's from intuition. And sometimes it's the harder decision is the one that's going to flow because your conscious mind doesn't want to make difficult decisions, but your subconscious knows. Do you think you agree with that?
I really like that articulation of it. To layer in more, it's kind of like the conscious mind thinks largely through words, and words are an approximation of things, but it's not the entirety of the thing. Like a word, it's trying to translate this kind of these ineffable sensations and the firing of neurons, and so we approximate with words, but it's never the exact thing. And so that subconscious that you're talking about, or that feeling in your gut or in your heart, or these different things that indicate a sense of flow or a lack of flow, those are, if you tune into them, deeper, truer sensations and places of processing. Now, it's hard in such a rational society where we think, everything has to be logical, or I have to have rational reasons for this, or what's the career path here? The two don't line up. And so I think it requires some conditioning yourself, outside the norms of what is mainstream culture, to kind of tap into the flow. But certainly the more you do it, the more you become attuned to, okay, this is giving me energy. I'm feeding off of this. Therefore, I'm going to be happier and do a better job of this, rather than this other thing that my mind is trying to tell me is the logical thing to do, but that, my body, my spirit is like, no, I have no energy to do that.
I'm really excited when I get to talk about projects and companies that have been around since the early days of crypto and supporting those projects. In many parts of the world, banking services simply haven't advanced at the same rate as the adoptions of smartphones and the internet. Africa, Southeast Asia, they're skipping entire financial services over, they're skipping people over, and they're not even building out that infrastructure until cryptocurrency. We all know this, we've been hearing about it for so long. Electroneum, a company based in the UK, decided to build an entire ecosystem based off of financial inclusion, empowering people, getting them involved, not just by working and by earning, but also by spending and being part of that community. Anytask.com is a company that's powered by Electroneum, over 500,000 users, and you have the ability to do all these freelance projects, earn money, earn their tokens, and not only just earn ETN, but also be able to spend it on all these different things. What's crazy is that, and what's crazy good is that AnyTask is attracting not just crypto people, but actual talented freelancers that are willing to take ETN in return for doing all this work. It's literally created this whole ecosystem. And the thing is, it's not been just like a new novel idea. It's been around for a while. They're doing it. They're growing every single day. They're doing millions of dollars in transactions. You got thousands and thousands of different people on the platform offering different services. And you should go check it out. It's so cool. The staff are great. The people are great. Everyone on the platform is so cool. According to ETN Everywhere, their official merchant directory, ETN can be spent in over, I think it's 2,000 physical locations and online locations worldwide. You're talking about in 140 countries, mobile airtime, shops, TVs, all these different things, not just being able to spend it. And so check them out, Electroneum, anytask.com. Support my sponsors. They're so cool, and I'm excited for you guys to check it out.
It's such a crazy perception, and I say crazy because what essentially I feel like you're saying, or what I'm thinking as you're talking, is that our brains have our bodies or our brains have a limiting factor, and that is that we can think and we could talk. Sorry, not that we think we could talk and we could think, but those are inefficient in a way because our brain uses. Okay, so what I've learned recently is our brains. You can burn more calories by brain power than you can powerlifting that day and running over a bridge. Like your brain uses more energy. If you get a Whoop, I got a Whoop, and you sit on a chair all day, which I don't do. But if you sat and you did like playing chess or something that was like so mentally draining, recording a podcast or something, I'll burn more calories right now than I will working out sometimes. Our brains use all this energy and all this power, but our ability to talk and to sometimes try to like think or not think as well, like limits that. And we're talking about the flow. I want to transition though from that into some things that you do really well. I want to bring up the article. You write really well, and that is kind of what we're talking about: taking a lot of this thinking and putting it down into words to help other people understand what you've worked out. One of the articles that I liked, and I'll just bring it up here, is while I'm not personally like involved in ZCash much, I've always followed it. But you wrote your ZCash thesis, and ZCash just had their first halving on November 17th. But I felt like the main point of the article was that you were saying that the crypto community, we have things backwards. We have privacy backwards. We focus on making transactions private, but not making sure like assets are private. Can you explain to the listeners what you mean by that and what you mean by we're like doing it backwards?
Sure. So, if you think about your typical mixer approach on Bitcoin or Ethereum, you have a transparent pseudonymous address where you store your assets. You send a transaction to a mixer to anonymize the assets, but then you return those assets that have been anonymized through a transaction back to a transparent address. And the thinking is, I took this action, I've anonymized myself, I'm good. But the two addresses, the one at the start and the one after, there's still a trail that's traceable. And it is true that it requires work, but the point of the ZCash thesis is it is a more efficient process, and at least using ZK snarks, a more secure process to always have, so in ZCash it would be using Z addresses, but to have shielded addresses. And then from a shielded place where there's perfect anonymity, you can, interestingly enough, transact openly if you wanted and save costs in that transaction. You can also transact anonymously. And then the key, again, is that you're returning to an anonymous address. And so it's just highlighting for people.
So what is then public? Like what would people see in that respect? And then why isn't all of Zcash like this? Why isn't, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. So you would see the transaction, but you wouldn't know the contents.
So like a block explorer would just show transactions, hash like that.
Right. And you wouldn't know the contents. Now Zcash, you can have shielded or non-shielded, and really the the distinction here is like privacy is the choice of anonymity. In some situations, you may want anonymity. In other situations, you may not need it. And so I think ZCash has designed a really elegant crypto money that is, good for all users depending on what they're looking for. It's not Monero, right? Where Monero is anonymous by default all the time, because ZCash is more thinking about the businesses and the average user. So let's take a business, right? JP Morgan may not want to reveal that they're wiring $10 million to XYZ bank. And so they might choose to use a shielded transaction where they're using the ZCash network. And then there's an extra wrinkle here, which is ZCash has viewing keys, where JP Morgan could actually give a viewing key to a regulator if a regulator needs to see that transaction. So then the regulator gets all the information, JP Morgan doesn't get in trouble, but then for business purposes, all of JP Morgan's competitors can't see what happened.
I mean, theoretically, so if we did something like this on Bitcoin, or if like you'd adopt something like this, how would it be reverse compatible with all the old transactions? And I think if that could be figured out, you'd be able to have some crazier and do it over a soft fork instead of a hard fork. And then really the last point of that though is, wouldn't it piss off governments more by that method as opposed to like having it where you can see everything except for what is being transacted? So all the addresses and everything else is still public, like on the Bitcoin blockchain, but the transaction itself, like, yeah, I want more privacy. However, at the same time, I don't want, having crypto seen as not a hostile thing has been very hard to get that, across the world.
Well, I think at Placeholder, we're generally thinking about what is best for the individual, what is best for the human, and what optimizes for their rights and their needs. And so when we look at ZCash, we see something that has really empowered the individual, has created the foundation for a fungible private crypto money, and then has things like the viewing key. Should a regulator really want to know the contents of a transaction, where you can reveal that key to prove what the contents of the transaction were. And so, it's accounted for a number of different stakeholders in the ecosystem. I'm sure, if you gave governments the choice, they would want full information on all things all the time. But, there's a balance between the individual and the powers that be.
Now we're on the cusp of Ethereum 2. I'm not sure.
Woo-hoo!
Is the staking contract fully funded? I haven't checked. I think it needs.
It is. Yeah. So it's overfunded at this point.
So Ethereum 2
we're going live tomorrow.
It's such a big news, and Ethereum is on its way, and it's always been one of the best. It was great. Ethereum will always be. I'll talk to children one day when I'm an old man, and I'll tell you, let me tell you something about Ethereum. If you looked at the people who came up, there's like a famous picture of all the people in the Miami house. You look at those people, these are like misfits and derelicts and people who like all failed out of high school and children. And it just goes to show you, like, you put brilliant people together and people who really want to change the world. I mean, you can come up with something like Ethereum. And I don't know whatever your views on COVID or politics or blah, blah, blah. But the fact that we've like basically saved humanity by coming out with this vaccine is nothing short of a miracle. Whether or not you want to take it, you have to like agree that it wouldn't have even come as fast if we didn't live in a capitalistic world. That's first. That's my first point here. But it's just kind of crazy. We can come up with Ethereum and Ethereum 2. Do you think that like out of all the major chains that are growing so rapidly, like Polkadot and some of the other ones, has Ethereum reached that like what's the word when like that Bitcoin has the
escape velocity?
I personally think that this year Ethereum did get that escape velocity now, but there's still a lot of like kind of like people still look at Ethereum's code base and how it came to be as like the best of what we have now. How can Ethereum change its perception on that?
That's a tough one, because I think Ethereum its whole life has had to fight a war of propaganda against
Yes.
Bitcoin maximalists. And so it's not wholly Ethereum that is in charge of its perception, right? And I actually wanted to ask you about what your experience was like going back in time from Bitcoin to when Ethereum came on the scene and that transition. But let's come back to that, because if we go back to January 2014, right, when Ethereum gets announced at the Miami Bitcoin conference, like Bitcoin is the thing. There's true altcoins at that time, just, you know, small forks and small differences from Bitcoin. But like Bitcoin is the thing. It controls the narrative. It controls the press. It controls the social, all of that stuff. And that has always, you know, been the case. And so as Ethereum has tried to rise, it's kind of like it's constantly been getting bullied by its big brother. Or I actually think of Bitcoin as the mother of the whole blockchain space, right? And so in a way, it's been getting bullied by its mother, which is a horrible thing. And so there's a whole bunch of propaganda. And I actually kind of took on this war socially in 2018 and 2019. In 2016 and 17, I was less outspoken, like an advocate for, you know, both Bitcoin and Ethereum and anything that's truly innovating with a quality team. But I was really like associated as the Bitcoin analyst that, you know, covered Bitcoin at ARC. But then in 2018 and 19, when I saw the duress that ETH was under, the price, while the community was continuing to build and there were all these cool things coming out, and then I was just seeing maximalists, you know, just bash Ethereum. I just, at a certain point, I really couldn't, it wasn't fair. Like it wasn't truthful. It wasn't fair. And so went out to educate.
What are the biggest myths, though? Not like what are the, but what's like the biggest? Well, I'll ask you that after. Please continue the story.
Well, so I guess just to conclude, you know, now people associate me more with Ethereum than with Bitcoin. And I would say, you know, I've got affinities for both in my heart. I've got, just being the human that I am, it's hard to embrace a community that can be, and not all of Bitcoin is like this. There are like a few outspoken characters socially that are quite toxic. And so, you know, over time, I have come to spend more time on Ethereum, really just because that's where more things are being built. If I look at like what's coming out in terms of decentralized applications, I see a lot more, and just Placeholder, the organic deal flow we get, a lot more of it is built on Ethereum. That does not at all discount Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is a different thing. I really think of Bitcoin as a digital gold.
It's okay everything that you're saying is not like, it's okay to be pro Ethereum and pro Bitcoin at the same time. Yes. This maximalism movement, and I know that I think that's what you wanted to ask me, really started as an anti-Ethereum movement. So Bitcoin maximalism I didn't even hear that term until like I was out of prison at this point. And Ethereum had started before I was even inside. But you know, early on in the Bitcoin Talk forums or forum.bitcoin.org or whatever, these were there was no such thing as Bitcoin maximalism. Charlie Lee was the biggest, you know, when Litecoin came out, it was just going to be seen as Bitcoin's little brother, and there was no hostility toward it. There was no hostility.
Right, more of a celebration.
Peercoin, Feathercoin. When you wanted to launch a cool coin, that was awesome. And I never really understood until very recently why Ethereum was seen as like this crypto killer, not Bitcoin killer. And unfortunately, there's blame on both sides because Vitalik was largely back then the only person writing about Ethereum, except for other people in the forums. Vitalik was the writer, and he was a Bitcoin magazine writer, writing on now starting this Ethereum thing. And the story and the history, it's kind of muddled on. Apparently, Vitalik actually wanted to build Ethereum on Bitcoin, and a lot of Bitcoin people were against it. That doesn't really matter. But at the end of the day, Ethereum should never have been seen as a negative. And so because that happened, that started this whole idea of maximalism in crypto. So people who are claiming to be maximalisms for life are liars because it never existed until like 2014 or 2015 or even 2016.
Right.
That whole term never really never really was a thing. By the way, I found the Sarasota School of Glass, and I'm going to go take glass blowing. I think I'm going to start glass blowing classes.
Do it, Charlie.
No, I'm really excited about it. I really want to do it.
That glass blowing is a great art form for flow. You've got a material that's above 2000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Can't wait. I'm so excited.
That's kind of like honey that you're spooling on the end of this, about 6 foot metal pipe. And you're working with it with air and tools and gravity. And it commands your attention. You can't,
can't
pause for a moment and go look at the phone or, and those are the best states of flow. So, with Ethereum, I think there's some insecurity there too, from some of the most toxic maximalists, where in a way, like, I think they would be better off embracing how awesome Bitcoin is for the things that it's awesome for, and embracing Ethereum for how awesome the things Ethereum is awesome for, versus like basically saying it's not Bitcoin, so it's a shit coin. It's just such a narrow kind of insecure worldview that is, very transparently that if you look at the nature of the conversation. And now I think you were asking, what are some of the biggest myths about Ethereum? Well, one is about to be busted, which is ETH2 will never ship. That's going to be busted
but I'm not
tomorrow.
sold on proof of stake, by the way. It's like
that's fine.
I'm really not, but that's another conversation for another podcast. I need to just do like a proof of stake series and have everyone come on and try to convince me that proof of stake is, but that's another conversation. Tune in for the proof of stake series where everyone tries to sell me on proof of stake.
That would be a good one. I encourage you to do it. There was recently this supply gate thing, which is, again, to me, just propaganda. Like there are, it really came from different clients accounting for supply and what had been burned
that was stupid.
In slightly different ways. And so there were slight discrepancies.
But the fact that Ethereum doesn't have a supply or whatever is where that stems from, or it does, or it wasn't.
It does have a supply. It's just there are, depending on how you account for all of the transactions through Ethereum's history going back to summer of 2015, you will get, slightly different amounts, but it's a de minimis discrepancy. And we know what ongoing inflation is. So like, the way I see it, we know the things that are important, and there are small discrepancies based on how different clients are accounting for the total supply. And, if you're coming from a Bitcoin value set, then, maybe that's really upsetting for you. If you're coming from this is a technology system where different people
that's how you look at it.
Get to account for these systems in slightly different ways, then it's okay. There are other, myths. I think maybe the deepest myth that won't die is that Ethereum is a scam. But if I go back,
anything's a scam. I'm a scam to everyone.
Yeah. So like, if you go back in time, I think they raised around $18 million. And now that was in BTC, so that's worth more now. But at the time, at the strike of BTC, they raised $18 million to build what is Ethereum today. And like that was an incredibly capital efficient exercise that enabled human innovation. So I feel like all of the myths
and it's funny that you say that because I remember asking Charles Hodgkinson why, how did you guys build and ship this with such a little amount of money so efficiently, And he said, simply because we were building it to ship. And if we had to use that money just for ramen packets to stretch it as much, that's what we had to do, because this is what we had to ship and we needed to ship something. Or the future, I think he said like the future of it wasn't Charles actually who said this, it was someone else. But he said that this was someone else who said that the future of their livelihood or their who they themselves are rests on shipping this. And I still agree with that. I want to I want to write a book, and I really, really do, but I also don't, because for a few reasons. But at the same time, if I were to write a book, I think I would start off the book with, something like this and say like most authors, almost every author who's ever written a book starts writing this story when they realize that they want to write a book, or when they realize that what they're writing needs to be written down. And so this story actually started for me 10 years ago, because when I got into Bitcoin, I knew that this was something that is the future and is my future. And I started writing that book mentally in my head almost 10 years ago. And that's how I'm going to start the book, because it's true. I vividly remember memories. I vividly remember things, saying to myself, mental note this, Charlie, this needs to go. So I think it's about 8-9 years ago. I remember some crazy stuff. Really, really, really crazy stuff. But what is exciting you like right now? What are you working on this week?
This week, well, there's kind of constant deal flow where Placeholder is always considering new investment opportunities. But then a large amount of my work is helping the existing portfolio networks on all the different things that arise. And the portfolio is around 25 different networks now, and so there's always a fire somewhere. Even though these are liquid and sometimes highly valued networks, a lot of them are still scaling operations and facing problems that startups face, and quality VCs can be there as a friendly sounding board to help teams through different trying times. And so that's a lot of what I do. Really quick on the book, if you do write the book, just remember, this was really helpful for me. Writing a book is a race against your own self-doubt. There's so much doubt in the process of constructing something that long. And you just have to get it to a place where you can hit send, hit publish, and working with an editor.
Who published your book and edited it?
So Jack and I worked with McGraw-Hill, and then we hired a outside editor by the name of Karen Lacey, who's really great. And we're actually working on another book right now, which is looking like it's going to be a fiction.
Oh, cool. And what was the name of your first book for the listeners?
Crypto Assets, The Innovative Investor's Guide to Bitcoin and Beyond. So that was a nonfiction, it's kind of a technical manual. And it's written for, someone that has some priors in the technology and financial world. I would say, if you had no experience in the technology or financial world, if you read it and took your time to understand each new word that you don't understand to start, then it's written to be comprehensible in that way. But it's really like a manual and something that people go back to reference at different points in time. And we were debating.
I would love to do a fiction book. My book as fiction. This way I can write it more of a story than I can.
You could write your story, man.
That's what I would do. I would write my story, but I would do it as I don't know. Can you write your own story, but do it as a fiction book? Or is that weird? I don't know how people do. I just don't. I never wrote a book before. I don't know.
There's no rules. So long as you write something that's engaging, that people keep turning the pages on, that's what makes a good book. I would
want to work with a publisher, not for the financial reasons. In fact, it's not something that I would even try to make money on, but I would want to work with a publisher just solely for distribution and for the longevity of distribution, knowing that longevity of distribution, and at the same time knowing that a party who has a vested interest in this book is there, but at the same time also has a vested interest in getting the book right, because then someone can come and sue them if they're not accurate. So it's almost you need someone to be there and make sure the fact check and everything.
Well, we can take that one offline, and I'm exploring the nonfiction or the fiction. I have to give the first look to McGraw-Hill, but they're generally not a publisher of fiction books, and so I'm going to be going back into the market again to find another publisher. And there's a whole world of you get agents that help you get a publisher and all that.
Yeah.
So we can have that conversation offline.
You should help me write my book, because I've always wanted to do it with not ghostwriter, but like someone else in the industry who's been involved in everything that I'm not involved in, so you can complete that picture. And then Anderson Cooper, when I was doing 60 Minutes, introduced me to his agent and said, when you're ready to write the book, call me. And I talked to the agent. So I just got to like do the book.
That's big time.
I know.
That's big time.
His agent is like invented the agency, the concept of like writer's agent. Like he's like the OG of the writing world. But I don't want to give too much away now. The listeners are like getting all this information. So
they're getting excited already.
I know. Hey, Chris, thank you so much though for coming on this show. I really do appreciate it. And this has been such a wonderful conversation. We went over our time, but I don't even care.
Well, thank you for having me, Charlie. It's great to converse with you, and I'm glad you're thinking of all these different things.
Thank you.